And this is where I think synthetic data will perhaps help fill that gap, because we have to be realistic about it. There isn't going to be like an ideal data set for every single use case, which is a perfect representation of human society. It's just not going to happen. I'm being very pragmatic about it.
I was talking to someone recently, though, who, similar, you talk about trust and safety. I was talking to someone recently who put a little bit of a framework around the challenges that enterprises face in thinking about implementing AI. And you have sort of hallucinations, you also have data accuracy, and you have data protection, like privacy, et cetera. Right. You also have things like tone. You have things like brand message. And there's kind of a few other problems. But what is your view as a researcher and an engineer in the space on what the biggest problem areas are right now, the hardest to solve, that innovators should be aware of?
Well, right now, the biggest problem is finding high quality data sets. And by high quality, I mean, it's particularly depending on what use case a model is being post-trained for, or say fine-tuned for, data sets that's representative of human society. Specifically, if we think about from the trust and safety domain. Now, there's machine learning techniques that can be used if there's a insufficient representation in a particular data set. But at the end of the day, what I'm hearing from people out there who are down in the weeds and from my own experiences is that machine learning techniques, like say, I think there was a technique called decouple classifier or something like that, and then a few other things where if a particular data set does not have adequate representation of something, you can kind of fake it into thinking that it does. But at the end of the day, there's really no shortcut around having high quality ground truth label data. And this is where I think synthetic data will perhaps help fill that gap, because we have to be realistic about it. There isn't going to be like an ideal data set for every single use case, which is a perfect representation of human society. It's just not going to happen. I'm being very pragmatic about it.
Not anytime soon, anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's just the way things are. So the way those gaps can be filled possibly is by using high quality synthetic data.
And how do you control for the almost inherent bias that is going to be, injected into the model, given that someone or something is making deliberate selections around what data to provide?
Exactly. So, I mean, unfortunately, the models will be a function of the training data. And I am very, very deliberately using the word unfortunately here, because that's just the reality of things. And we can perhaps see, and there's also other factors here. For example, there can be also some mechanism to perhaps intercept a prompt and then tweak the prompts in a way based on certain individual or certain group of individuals within a company's viewpoints. And that can also happen on the other side, where the model spits out an output and that can be intercepted. Now, who determines what's right and what's wrong? I mean, as we see in this world today, that is a function of people's opinions. And the more power a person has, the more they have the ability to have LLMs output what they want, to have LLMs train on what they want. Which is why I think what needs to happen is there needs to be what I like to call let 1,000 flowers bloom. So if we have a lot of companies be able to develop LLMs, be able to develop machine learning models, I think just over time it will average out, where we will have people of different viewpoints basically making the decision to not train a model on a certain data set. And maybe there will be somebody on the other side who has the other viewpoint, and it's going to average out over time.
You effectively have a market approach.
Exactly. Now the problem, sorry, if I may just add to that. Yeah. The problem to that is that the GPU costs for developing LLMs are so high that currently it's limited to only a very few companies with extremely deep pockets. And I'll give an example. Earlier this year, there was a company founded by a professor and his PhD student from CMU who founded this robotics startup, and they want to build an LLM specifically for robotics use case. I think they raised close to $100 million, and they said they were going to use most of that money to train their model. So because of the very high cost of GPUs, unfortunately, the ability to create LLMs is limited to very few companies. So I'm hopeful that perhaps we may see some development in the next 5 to 10 years where the chip development industry changes. Maybe there's ways where LLMs can be trained without having to buy extremely costly GPUs, but we'll see.
Well, I mean, you certainly see quite a lot of capital going into folks who have, you know, new dedicated hardware, new
Right.
ideas on training, et cetera. And it does seem to be a rapidly accelerating cost curve, right, or decelerating
Right.
cost curve. But yeah, it is really fascinating.